Adesso mi fa fare una prova. Se riesco a tirare la sua attenzione con la telepatia. Non ho notato come si chiama, ma è molto sveglia, ma non so più come si chiama. Deve chiamarsi Giulia.
Ho chiesto di attivare il video allora in caso.
Loro sono connessi, chiedono di farli sapere 5 minuti prima.
Chiedi di fare una prova.
Please let us know about 5 minutes before you start as we will be asking. Ah, ok, no, quello è il servizio vino. No, loro sono connessi.
Mi dai gentilmente uno anche per il
Please,
Here,
ok.
well, simultaneous translation. 1, 2, 3, 4. Test, test, test. Can you hear me, please? If you don't mind, we can try. Wait, you have to. Did you switch it on?
Ok? Non c'è ancora?
Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3, 4. Test, test. The volume should be. Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh no, ce n'è. La devo togliere, non riesco mai a individuarla. Let me check whether there is. Maybe. Well, I give you this one. And it's pretty strange for me to speak in Italian to an audience who is mainly English speaking audience, but we are in Milan and we speak in Italian. So a warm welcome to you and a warm welcome to our guests in London who are going to taste the same wines as we do. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here to talk about the smallest Prosecco ever, the Asolo Prosecco. We will see it later. I'm sure you know that the universe of Prosecco, as we like to call it, is a very complex world, a large world with very outstanding figures. Asolo Prosecco, within the universe of Prosecco, is a sort of crew because it's a pretty limited production. Let's first and foremost see where we are. We're in Veneto. Asolo is a little city, nice, beautiful little city in Veneto, and it's one of the most beautiful small villages in Italy, and it's not too far from Venice. And here is nice days with nice weather from the Asolo Hills. You can see the Gulf of Venice, and behind your shoulders you have the Dolomites. So if you look in this direction, you see Venice, and on the at the back you have the Dolomites, wonderful mountains. And it's no coincidence that Cyprus Queen, the Cyprus Queen. Was given Asolo to rule, and she turned it into a sort of workshop of Italian Renaissance and invited many sculptors and painters and poets and writers in Asolo. And this tradition continues. Today is the 200th anniversary of the death of Antonio Canova, who is a very famous Italian sculptor, very famous for some statues, and he was born in Possagno, 5 minutes from Asolo, and he had his first workshop in Asolo. And many important foreign authors lived in Asolo. And for our British friends who are following us, the main road of Asolo is very small. It's called Robert Browning Street, Via Roberto Browning, who was one of the most important British poets who lived in Asolo. And last week I organized a tasting at Villa Freya, which was the house of Freya Starr, who is this very famous author and traveler who lived in Asolo. Ernest Hemingway lived in Asolo. So Asolo is still a place which is very much loved by many authors. It's a magical place. We often say wine is magical. I don't like to say wine is magical, but in any case, Asolo is a very charming little town. And here you see where Asolo is located with the Asolo Prosecco area. So you know the world of Prosecco covers almost all of Veneto, excluding the Veneto and Rovigo provinces, and all over Friuli, Venezia Giulia. And this is for Prosecco DOC. So the Prosecco DOC area last year ended 2021 with about 620 million bottles sold across the world. However, in the world of the universe of Prosecco, which is a DOC, denomination of controlled origin, we have two DOCGs, which are Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco, which is this part here, and Asolo Prosecco, which is on the other side of the Piave River. So Conegliano Valdobbiadene and Asolo are separated by this Piave River that has been extremely important for the birth of Italy as a state. Piave, as all rivers, might seem to unite, but actually divides, because honestly, these wines are very different. The right side and left side, the right bank and the left bank of the Piave give very different wines. This is Asolo, as you can see, full of historical buildings and sculptures. And what is very interesting is the color of the buildings. Because if you consider the color of Asolo Prosecco is this yellow color, which is exactly the same color as Asolo buildings. The historic city center of Asolo buildings are this color. Why is it so? Well, because the soil in Asolo has this color. So these buildings are painted using the clay that is on the surface of Asolo hills. And below this ochre yellow, there is white limestone. But then we will see the difference between the various soils. However, when you are in Asolo, you are in the midst of this color. And this is also the color of wine, because Asolo Prosecco has exactly that color. So the color of Asolo, and so it's a typical Venetian city, Asolo. So Venetian culture, Venetian architecture, and this city actually is not very small, and this includes the area includes Asolo and other 17 communities, the Asolo Prosecco. So there are 18 municipalities all in all. But you will see that the vineyards are very, very few. Why? Well, because of some very specific characteristics. You can tell this from this picture already. On the forefront, we have some leaves, leaves, and behind we have the Rocca di Asolo, the Asolo Castle. And the forests and woods are a very distinctive feature of Asolo Prosecco territory. This is one of the areas with the largest extension of woods and forests in Italy. And this biodiversity has a key role in the Asolo territory. Just some historical background. 1985, the consortio was established. At that time, it was called the Colli Asolani Prosecco. And that was a very small production, just very few bottles. Then in 2009, the big DOC of Prosecco was established, and the two DOCGs were created. And so in 2009, we have a sort of spin-off of Conegliano Valdobbiadene and Asolo Prosecco. So in 2009, we have a DOC, Prosecco DOC, and two DOCGs, which is controlled and guaranteed origin denomination, which are Conegliano Valdobbiadene and Asolo Prosecco. Then in 2012, Asolo Prosecco, that still had very small hundreds of thousands of bottles, so very low numbers. A zoning project was implemented. A group of researchers studied the climates and soils and types of vines. And in 2014, following those studies, something new was established for the world of Prosecco. That is to say, the first Asolo Prosecco Extra Brut. No one had ever made extra brut Prosecco. Until that time, Prosecco was just brut, from brut to dry. There was no extra brut. And so the first one, the first extra brut, was made in 2014. But still in 2014, the number of bottles was very, very low for Asolo Prosecco. And where do we stand now? I cross my fingers, but the forecasts for sales tell us that we are supposed to end 2022 with 25 million bottles. And then we will see the trend over the years, and perhaps you can start serving the wines. And this means that between 2018, when the figures started to get interesting, until now, we had a 98% growth. Asolo Prosecco was a tiny little production, one of the smallest denominations in Italy. Now it's the fourth denomination for sparkling wines after Prosecco DOC, Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco, and Asti, that is another spumante. We have 60 wineries of Asolo Prosecco, 2 years ago, they were less than 30. So we have twice as many wineries that make and market Asolo Prosecco. And this translates in 200 hectares under vines, and 60% of this wine is exported. This is the progression of Asolo Prosecco, the growth trend. It's pretty incredible. We were around 5 million bottles in 2015, and then from 2019, the sales have skyrocketed. Why is it so? Well, because we started not just to make Prosecco, we started to make wine with a strong territorial identity. An identity always rewards you. What is the identity of Asolo Prosecco? We will explore it together with the wines we will taste and with my next slides. So I asked that they serve the first three wines. Generally, I don't describe the sensory features of wines. You are much more familiar with wine tastings than anyone has his or her own sensations. But I would like to run a test with you. I will have you taste three wines first, which are extra brut, so sugar from 0 to 4 grams, 5 grams. So first three, the one with more sugar is 5 grams. So these are dry wines, and then we will try two extra dry and a dry wine. And I will have you taste these two different interpretations, the driest and softest versions of Prosecco, because my opinion is that sugar shouldn't influence the identity of a wine. So if a wine has a strong identity, the taste might change, so the sugar, the softness might change, but there should be no change in the identity of that wine, that is to say, sensations of freshness and floral notes, fruity notes, mineral notes, sapidity. So sugar should not influence these factors. So we will run a test. We will try to understand whether the increase in sugar changes softness or sweetness, but it doesn't change the typical characteristics of Asolo soils and climate. So taste the first three wines. Don't wait for me, just taste them. I would like to tell you just that the first wine is you can tell from the color, so it's pretty turby because it's called sui lieviti on the lees. That is a version of Asolo Prosecco that is not disgorged. So they make the white wine, then they do the tirage, and then the wine stays in the bottle to re-ferment and stays in the bottle. So yeasts would stay in the bottle. That's called ancestral method. And so it's very dry. Sugar is zero because yeasts would completely consume the sugar that is present in the wine. So this is the Secca, the dry version. Producer is Case Paolin, one of the first organic wineries. It's Asolo Prosecco called Col Fondo sui Lieviti, so on the lees. So it's a brut nature, very, very dry. When we say col fondo, it means that the wine remains turbid because the yeasts are still contained in so surli, sui lieviti, or col fondo means the same thing. Surli is in French, sui lieviti in Italian, and col fondo it's in the Veneto dialect, but they are synonyms. So here we start from 0 grams of sugar. Then you have a second wine, which is probably Bresolin Bio, so which is extra brut. I think it's 4 grams. That's another producer, very small scale producer, and then Nero Villa Sandi. That is another extra brut. So three extra brut versions, and so you taste them, and then we discuss about them later. Okay, let's see what are the styles of Asolo Prosecco. So styles range from the sui lieviti, which is on the lees, so not disgorged, so there was no disgorgement. And this is a small production, a niche production, so a few thousand bottles. Then we move to extra brut that has to have less than 6 grams per liter of residual sugar by law. Here we have a 4 gram and 5. The first is 0 grams, second 4 grams, and third 5 grams. After extra brut, we have the brut that by law has to be below 12 grams per liter of residual sugar. Then we have extra dry, which has a residual sugar between 12 and 17 grams per liter. And then we have the dry version that can range from 17 to 32 grams of residual sugar per liter. So these are different styles, but you should perceive the identity of the territory. But let's see now what are the shares of each type of each style. Extra dry has the lion's share. 74% of Asolo Prosecco is extra dry. And above all, and that's mainly for export, because foreign countries like and ask for the extra dry version. 18% is brut, 5% is extra brut, 2% is dry, which is the sweetest version. And here there is this terminology of spumante wines, which is terrible, because dry would mean secco, but actually dry for spumante means sweet. You know better than me that this is all due to champagne. Champagne, that is the spumante wine par excellence, is moelleux or douce or sweet. And then the taste changed in France, and during the Belle Epoque, there was very much a lot of demand for champagnes that were a little less sweet than douce. So this slightly less sweet version was called dry, which would be secco in Italian, but it's less sweet than the one that is douce, sweet. And so this creates a huge confusion, because especially for international guests, I tell, you are dry. Oh yes, I want to have it dry. No, dry means sweet for spumante wines, but that's what it is. That's life. So we have this terminology which is influenced by the champagne production in France in the 19th century. Slightly less than 1% is the one called sur lit, so the one that is a bit cloudy in the first glass. And now let's talk about the identity of Asolo Prosecco. The first thing we can say that we feel to be a crew of Prosecco, because we are so small, because Prosecco DOCS is 128 million bottles, Conegliano Valdobbiadene 108 million bottles, Asolo Prosecco 21 million 400. Will we become big? No, I don't think so, because we have enough vineyards to make maximum 30 million bottles. When we will get to 30 million bottles, probably next year, that's it, full stop. We can no longer grow, and we don't want to grow more than this. We don't want to grow more because we have so our vineyards are on the hills, sometimes on very steep slopes. And there's more to this, because we have an Italian journalist called Sissi Baratella. A couple of months ago wrote an article, and the title was Where are the vineyards of Asolo Prosecco? Because it's hard to find vineyards in Asolo, because they are all scattered around in the forest. So if you drive in the roads, in winemaking areas, you see vineyards all over the place. Whereas in Asolo, it's very rare to see vineyards along the roads. There are a few, but most of them are scattered in the middle of the forests. So there are more forests than vineyards. And then we will see how many these are. We will talk about the sizes later on. So we want to preserve strong biodiversity, because if we replace forests with vineyards, we lose our biodiversity, which is key to us. In our territory, for instance, on the hills of Monfumo, which is a small village close to Asolo with the most fascinating vineyards, we have 5 different varieties of ancient, of heirloom apples that were rescued from the forest, and heirloom pears too. We are the northernmost area where extra virgin olive oil is made. We have a large abundance of trees and plants of both alpine origin and Mediterranean origin. We are close to Venice, but we are under Monte Grappa, so Grappa. We have mountains and hills, so we have this huge biodiversity that we want to preserve. We don't want to grow more, because growing more would be killing our biodiversity, but we don't want that, because biodiversity is part of us, is part of our DNA. And we have some large companies, but also many small-scale family wineries. There are 2 big ones. One is a cooperative winery, and the other 55 producers are minuscule, very small. And this is part, too, of the biodiversity of our world. We have a very ancient know-how. The Sulieviti, the Surly version, is what our grandfather used to do in their houses, in their cellars. This is the ancient tradition, ancient style. And our production is very artisanal. If you visit the smallest wineries, you don't find anything in the cellars, because they are almost empty. There's, no special facilities. And this is part of us, part of our style. And we have a lot of history, culture, and art in our territory. And we cannot industrialize our production. Otherwise, we would lose this precious, valuable identity card, which is made up of these elements in particular. And so we have mountains and hills. We have the Asolani hills, the Colli Asolani. Do you remember the 7 hills of Rome? Well, Asolo too has 7 hills. They look like small volcanoes, but they're not volcanoes. They are very pointed, and they are beautiful because they are completely covered with forests. And then close to Colli Asolani, we have a very long hill, which is called the Montello. And Montello comes from monte, mountain. But actually, it's a tiny hill. It's not very high, but very long. And that's important because that was important for the birth of Italy, because the most important battles in the First World War were fought. And that hill, which is made of a big forest, was the forest of the Dogi. And the Dogi were the masters of Venice. And so the forest of Montello were used to take timber, to use the wood, the timbers, for 2 goals that Venice had, because you know that Venice is built on wooden poles. So the poles that support Venetian buildings come from Cansiglio, which is a forest close to Asolo, and from the Montello hill. And also, in Montello is the place where they took the timber for Venice also to build boats, because Venice conquered the Adriatic Sea and the Mediterranean Sea with boats made with Montello timber. And so why should we ever eliminate our forests? No way. They are part of our history. And also, I like to eat, and you can tell from my belly, And here in these forests, you can collect delicious mushrooms. They are extraordinary, and we like eating mushrooms because Agosolo, Prosecco, and mushrooms are delicious. And then Montello is magnificent because the Austrians built the so-called prese. Also, the Venetians did that. The prese are roads that cross the Montello, and they are numbered from 1 to 40 approximately. So these prese, these roads, because prese means taken or captured or caught. So they were intended to go take the timber from the forest. So the Venetian authorities would say, go take, prendere, the timber from road number 5. And so they would go to road number 5, get to the forest of road number 5. They would take, so prese, prendere, the wood, and they are still present there. And this is still used today. So on the Colli Asolani, there is Monte Grappa, which is a pretty high mountain. That was also very important during the First World War. And this Monte Grappa is covered in forests. And there they make delicious cheeses. The Bastardo del Grappa, Casatella, Trevigiana, Morlacco are wonderful cheeses. I haven't them with me today, but maybe next time we can taste them too. And then on the back of our shoulders we have the Dolomites. So that's an extraordinary area from the environmental standpoint. And the climate, we have continental climate from Monte Grappa. There is snow during the winter. But from the Adriatic Sea and Venice, we have the Mediterranean climate. So much so that, as I've said, we are the northernmost extra virgin olive oil producing area in Italy. So there is a wide variety. We have the variety of oil called Asolana that is used to make a very sweet, delicious wine. And we have a lot of wind. The wind helps us to keep our vineyards healthy, because the more windy it is, the more healthy the vineyards are. And we have two soils, white limestone with an ochre surface on Colli Asolana and red clay on the Montello. And so let's now discuss the first 3 wines. I also taste them. Oh, no, wait. I will taste them later. Oh, no, wait. Yes, I taste the first one with you. So the first characteristic that stands out in these wines is certainly powerful sapidity. So they're very salty, savory. And this is a typical characteristic of Asolo Prosecco. And this is because of the climates that I've described and the type of soils that we have seen. For the sake, so the dry versions, it's difficult to find these to find different features. The first wine is Surly, and therefore there is a strong presence of yeasts. And so it's very particular. Let's taste number 2 and then number 3. So one of these 2 wines is slightly more floral, and the other is more fruity. And according to me, the third wine has this note of Williams pear, whereas the second one has floral notes of white flowers. What is this telling me? What do these descriptors tell me? So I said there is savoriness, saltiness, sapidity in all of them. This is because of the climate and the geographical location. Then we have flowers in number 2 and pear in number 3. The soils of Colli Asolani give sensations of notes of white flowers. The Montello soils give notes of apple or pear. So you have freshness and acidity, which is constant, then sapidity is constant, but then you have a small additional descriptor, which is related to the soils. So limestone soils of Colli Solani can be recognized because of their floral nodes. The soils of red clay of Montello can be recognized either by the presence of apples or pears. On the other side of Piave, in Cornigliano Badaviade, the soils are similar to Montello. The wines have either pear or apple nuances. So some people say Prosecco is a technical wine. Yes, it's technical. It's made with the Martinotti method or Sharma method. We prefer to say Martinotti because he is the one who invented the process, whereas Sharma patented it only. It's true, it's a technical wine that, however, it conveys a very clear territorial identity. Otherwise, it would be useless to keep all these distinctive features so separated based on the various areas. So we would then, at that point, plant vines everywhere, make a lot of wine, make the same wine, and sell it all. Oh, no, that wouldn't be good because that would mean a loss of identity. So let's take a look at the varieties. Glera, first and foremost. Once Glera was called Prosecco. But then we have other local varieties. And so we will work a lot, not just to enhance these local varieties, but we want to introduce more because we have the grape variety called Rabbiosa that isn't even part of the catalogue of Italian grape varieties that can be used for winemaking. But we will include it in our disciplinare, in our rule book, because we want these varieties to grow. How are these grape varieties? Here they are. This wine, wine number 4, is made with all of these old grape varieties from 50, 80-year-old ancient vineyards. So if you want to really perceive the taste of Sapera, then of Glera, then Verdiso, Bianchetta, Trevigiana, Pereira, and Glera Lunga, please taste the 4th wine, which is which comes from these wines. The yields are lower than Prosecco DOC, 130, so 13.5 tons per hectare. But the figures, which are very important and different from many other Italian winemaking countries, almost all the others are different. These are the two distinctive figures and percentages. In Asolo, in the area of Asolo Prosecco, only 6% of the territory is covered with vineyards. 29% of this territory is still forests. Finding these vineyards is almost impossible. So you have to cross the forests to find them. And generally these vineyards are very steep, generally facing south. Cos'è questo sibilo pazzesco? Sento un suono fastidiosissimo. Adesso non lo sento più. And these are on very steep slopes, and we have to bring the soil back on top because the vineyards flow downhill. So you may say, yes, it's Prosecco, but it depends. So it's a very special viticulture and very hard. So it's a very particular territory that has these characteristics, especially with this salinity. So this is the training system, the typical training system of Glera. But as you can see, these rows are very large and broad with this training system, and you always have forests all over the place. That's our vineyards are. So this is a very ancient pear tree, which is kept right next to the vineyards, which are very steep, as you can tell. So, of course, you wouldn't remove this pear tree to plant vineyards there too. You keep these kind of things because they are part of our DNA. So the other wines are about to be served, and so let's see whether the softest ones, because we had Surly, 0 sugars, and 4 and 5. And then we were served 2 extra dry and 1 dry Prosecco, where sugar is much more. The first is extra dry by Bele Casella. It's an extra dry that remains in the pressure tank in the autoclave for a long time. So it remains in stainless steel for a long time. Just a couple of figures to make you understand better. So these vineyards are more than 8-year-old, and the wine is kept for 22 months in stainless steel. So 22 months in stainless steel, and then the presence in the pressure tanks continues for 16 months. So a 16-month Charma is very similar to a Metodo Classico. And it would even be very expensive to make this kind of wine. But this is how you can use ancient varieties, so heirloom varieties. Otherwise, the wine is a kind of wild wine. So we have this vanilla note and hawthorn, white flowers, because that's what the Colli Asolani are like. Let's taste the next one, which is 57 di Montegliana, the only cooperative winery. So in this case, we perceive the note of pear. Then it comes from Montello. You can tell, you can immediately perceive these differences. And then, of course, you have a lot of softness. But we had the fruity and floral notes in the dry version are also in the soft version. Let's taste the dry one, which is the softest of all. This is 20, let me check, 20 grams of sugar. So quite a lot of sugar. And so the typical sapidity of those soils somehow stands out and keeps correcting and adjusting and balancing off the sugar. So you perceive the sugar, but the mouth keeps salivating and keeps cleaning itself. And that's what Asolo is like. Asolo, that's how Asolo is. You have these characteristics of climates and soils that even prevails on sugars. Then I understand that the market is asking for extra dry wines because they are pleasant, simpler to use, simpler to pair, to drink as aperitifs. True, but I like to look for the characteristics that are related, that come from the territory. Let's take a look at a few more figures. So number 1 is a col fondo. It comes from Volparo del Montello. but it's more difficult to perceive the fruity notes because the leaves are present, and also it's cloudy, it's turbid because of the presence of these yeasts. The winery is Case Pauline, which is a small-scale producer that makes top-quality wines, also top-quality red wines on Montello. There is about 500,000 bottles of red wines, especially Bordeaux style. And then the second wine has 4 grams of sugar and is the Extra Brut by Bresolin Bio. They make Sharma 3 months on the lees in the tank. Then the third one is Nero Extra Brut by Villa Sandi with 5 grams of sugar. And then that is in Nervese della Battaglia, so it's in the area of Montello. Then the fourth comes from Monfumo, a cru of Asolo Prosecco, with these very ancient vineyards. Bele Casella is the winemaker. Then 57, because in 1957 the Oli Cooperative Winery was founded. This is an extra dry, 16 grams of sugar per liter. This was number 5. And 6th is a dry by Bedin, which is the second producer by size in the denomination. And he likes this little child, so they make just a few bottles because they like it, and I like it too very much. And there are 20 grams of sugar per liter, but supported by almost 6% acidity. So acidity is quite significant, and it tends to give this sensation that is less sweet in these wines. And underlying all this, we have this sapidity, this saltiness. I don't know if you ever tasted Asolo Prosecco before. I don't think many of you did, because this is a very small production. But I would like to hear from you. What is your impression? So is this a Prosecco, or can it truly be said to be a vino di territorio, so a territorial wine? So I'm happy that you say this is a territorial wine. Yes, there was very little. It's hard to come by, but it's a very territorial wine. In the end, it's Glera and Prosecco. However, we would like to enhance even more these characteristics. Our goal is to ensure that the characteristics of Montello dei Colli Asolani are even more strengthened, and increasing the time in the pressure tanks on the lees can help us enhance this characteristic. And especially the young producers. As you've seen, we went from 30 to 60 producers in 2 years. So younger producers love the drier versions, so the sweeter versions. And of course, the international market, for the time being, is asking more for the extra dry, because in the end you have to tell your wine. And it's not that it's not good, but younger producers are focusing a lot on indigenous varieties, the long Martinotti, long Sharma, and the sapidity of the wine. Will this Asolo Prosecco become maybe less easy, simple? Well, never mind, too bad. According to us, there's a market who is asking for a diversity also from sparkling wines and from Prosecco. So we want to be Asolo Prosecco. We don't want to be better than the other 2 Prosecco styles. We just want to be different from the other 2 styles. All wines are good when they are made well and communicate the identity. We want to communicate our identity, which is different from the one of Prosecco DOC and Conegliano Val d'Oviatere. It has to be different. Otherwise, we should all make the same wine, and that's it. Any impressions, any comments on your side? There is this common denominator on all these wines. So now the serving temperature are a bit, I mean, they were perfect when they were served, but now we are in a sort of greenhouse, and then so. But we still have this refreshing sensation on the palate, and therefore this is because of the mineral salts and the sapid components and this freshness that make it very pleasant to drink. I think it's a good idea that they want to keep this traditional style unchanged. It would be wrong not to do that because, in any case, the volumes are mainly for more softer Proseccos, and exploring and innovating. And I think it's a good insight, a good idea to make drier products that are easier to drink and that can be paired more easily with food.
Any question from here or from London?
I have a question on the disciplinares, on the rules. So on the type of grapes and blends. Are you different from Prosecco or same? Is it the same or exactly the same? Well, we are completely similar for the amount of glera, that is must be 85%. But we have many indigenous varieties and probably will extend if possible, but we will make it in the end. We will increase the number of indigenous varieties. Also, glera is indigenous, of course, but we want to grow. We want to have more local varieties. And we are working with Rabbiosa. Rabbiosa, we can, so Rabbiosa means angry. Rabbia is rage. And if you taste Rabbiosa ready for fermentation, it has an extreme acidity. But with the climate change we have now, these kind of indigenous varieties with high acidity are perfect. And so we want to use it and make the most of it. It's not easy because it's not even allowed to use it, to grow it. And what about making rosé? So are we considering to make rosé? Well, for the time being, rosé is made only by Prosecco DOC, the Prosecco DOC area. For the time being, we have not yet decided on this. We discussed in the meeting, in our the members' meeting. There are different opinions. We still have to think about it because any change to our rule book that we may assume must take into account that biodiversity that we want to protect. So if making rosé means using non-indigenous grapes, I don't know. Well, we will see. We're thinking about it very seriously. However, we are a far cry from making a final decision. We are truly very far. Well, on the press, some said that we do that, but at the time, for the time being, the board of directors haven't discussed this topic yet. We had a chat, we had a conversation with the members to have their opinions, but that's it. And I have to say that I'm very fond of rosé wines, and I have to say that Pinot Noir in the area has been present since the mid of the 19th century, and it has always been used to make the rosé wine. So there is somewhat a sort of tradition. But we have Pinot Noir in our rule book, but we will think about it, and it will take time for us to decide, and calm too, because first of all, we shouldn't lose our identity. I mean, we shouldn't chase the market too much. This doesn't mean we might decide to do that in a year, but first of all, we have to make sure we protect our identity. Then we can look at the market. By doing that, we went from 0 to 25 million bottles. So it means that the world is ready to buy Prosecco with this kind of identity. So if we change this identity, we would lose all the market we have conquered. So we will seriously think about it, and we will ask the local producers and see what they think, and considering the characteristic of local soils and grapes. That's a question about sugars. So let me repeat the question for the translator. The question was whether there is any assumption, any plan to write the amount of sugars in each type of wine, because it's very hard for consumers to know this amount. At the moment, there are no rules in Italy that allow us to do so. As I say at the moment, because it might well be that the rules are changed. I know that the government has a new decree on labeling and packaging of wines. But I have no preview about that, because it's not just not wanting to do that, but we have to stick to the law. I mean, we have to do what the regulation, the rules allow us to do. You know, Italy is the land of red tape. There was another question as to the average price. Is this choice rewarding you in terms of prices compared to ordinary Prosecco? Well, I say it does, because actually small-scale producers can charge higher prices. Of course, if you have small quantities and then indigenous yeasts and indigenous varieties, I say that it does. But I say no from the economic standpoint, because prices are made by demand and supply. Our vineyards, the 2,000 hectares of vineyards we have, we can enable us to make 30 million bottles. At the moment, we make 25 million. And so potential demand can be higher than supply until we don't match the demand, the price will not go up. But next year we will get to balance between supply and demand. And at that point is to open the price range. So we will have a line of Asolo Prosecco for the so-called modern channels, retailers for cheaper prices, and then we will have quote unquote some reserva wines, so more special wines that will tend to have a higher price. We want to remain a very democratic wine with some elements of aristocracy and of top quality. For instance, with wines like this, limited production, organic production, selection. You know that Villa Sandi is very large, a large winery, especially in the Prosecco DOC. But this is a selection that they've made in their vineyards of Nervesa della Battaglia. So the positioning of Asolo Prosecco at the moment is mainly in the large retail chains. We are entering restaurants, and I think that in 2024 prices will change, I guess, or 23, end of 23, when we have saturated demand, the level of demand, and so we will have more demand than supply. So at that point, yes, the prices will change. But of course, not for all the types of wine, but we will make just wines with a higher positioning, and we will try to have a wider range of prices and styles. So we will have very popular wines, and on the other, very elitist wines. We want to make a sort of super Asolo Prosecco. There's a question from London. Actually, it's more a feedback. So the wines are very pure compared to those of other regions like Conegliano Valdobbiadene. Well, I have to say that Conegliano Valdobbiadene wines are beautiful and delicious. I thank you very much for your comment. Of course, what we do is to try to communicate the idea of Asolo, the diversity of Asolo, the identity of Asolo resulting from our soils, our biodiversity, our history, our climate. And what I hope is that Conegliano Valdobbiadene can be recognized perfectly, just like Asolo Prosecco. So why not organizing a dinner and compare and contrast the two identities so that we would abandon the idea that Prosecco is all the same, because it's not all the same. It has plenty of souls, and it's good to compare the different souls of Prosecco with different identities and denominations and prices, of course. Why not?
Any other question? Ditemi se sono cattivi questi vini o se si possono bere.
Please tell me if these wines are bad or if you like them. They are very bad. So tell us something.
Your idea, you're very critical.
I'm an American, and I'm looking at this more as an issue of acceptance and understanding on the part of the American wine consuming public. Prosecco is very popular. It has made sparkling wine okay to drink for non-celebratory occasions, and that's great. Differentiating Asolo from Prosecco is a big communications challenge in the United States. On top of the price, just the fact that it's not the same and that it's not that's a big challenge. How do you handle that?
Condivido totalmente.
I totally agree with you. It's a big challenge about communication. I mean, it's a big challenge to explain the difference of this wine compared with the other Prosecco. It's a big challenge. Actually, we're very young. We have an historical production, but it didn't exist virtually. Glera made in Asolo ended up in Prosecco DOC. Now we have Asolo Prosecco. So I started dealing with Asolo Prosecco in November 2019, so right before the pandemic. So in November 2019, the consortium was just a USB key with the accounting and a lady who on a part-time basis was managing the denomination. Now we have 4 full-time workers, we have a press office, we have a headquarters. And this is the growth of the last 3 years. We didn't have the money even 3 years ago. When I went there in November 2019, there wasn't any money to pay my salary. We all bet on this wine. We are winning the bet, and the next bet will be to increase the identity and communicate that identity. But to communicate it, we need to have a critical mass, and we need money too.
You talked about the designation of use of dry, which really means sweet, and then you started using the word soft as another synonym for sweet, just further confusing the issue. To Americans, the most popular Prosecco is Marca. It's 17 grams of residual sugar, and you have to look really hard to find out that it says extra dry. But many people, my wife included, like La Marca. Not because they like La Marca, they like the level of sugar, but it's not indicated on the label. So there's an opportunity there to reframe the discussion instead of being at the tail end of the dog of champagne and using words that mean nothing to Americans and especially to this newer generation of millennials and Gen Z. What if Asolo took the lead on that and said, hey, we're going to use real words to describe real flavors that you can understand either by word or graphically. We're doing it with Riesling, with a sugar scale, if you will.
Yes, this is also another very significant comment because a Prosecco from a large cooperative in the US in particular is extra dry, and it's a fairly high extra dry. And it's obviously difficult to say we are different. However, be careful because Prosecco, all in all, means 750 million bottles. We are just 25 million bottles, so we shouldn't sell them to the entire world necessarily. We can choose. Different targets, very selected targets, and we want to do so. And I don't exclude that we will do some maintenance of our rule book, trying to the extent possible, so within the framework of the law, to be clearer in the description of what you find in the bottle. I mean, of course, we have to comply with the law, and of course, we have the regulation, the Italian law, the Italian regulation, or European regulation. So I hope, first of all, that the new government reconsiders the labeling of Italian wines, and that new opportunities are given to us for these possibilities. And then we also want to change some aspects of the rule book to explain something more. From London, they would like to know the price of these wines. Well, that's always a good question, but I cannot answer because I'm representing the consortium, and the prices are set by the companies, by the wineries, so I cannot tell you. Let's say that on average, on an Italian shelf, an Asolo Prosecco would cost 8.5 euro in Italy, on the shelves in Italy. Some cost more. Some of these wines cost more. Well, if it's 18 months in the pressure tank, it's more expensive. But in any case, the price is pretty democratic, affordable. Please. Well, before you said it would be nice to try these different products, different wines, and I had so I had a tasting in Zurigo in 2016, and I had to come to Italy to buy 3 bottles. And actually, people was wondering what it was and why it's DOCG and DOCG and it's less expensive than the others. However, I firmly believe in this denomination since 2016 because these wines are, I'm sorry for the Americans, but they are less based on the beauty of the labels, and I can tell to the importance that there is demand for these wines. Yes, of course, we don't want to compete with no one, with no other Prosecco producers. We are not interested in competing with the other Prosecco. We want to be Asolo Prosecco. So that's the choice that we made. And You know that by law, a Prosecco DOCG can be called superiore in the label. So on our labels, you read Asolo Prosecco Superiore DOCG. But we don't communicate superiore or DOCG. We just say Asolo Prosecco, just two geographical names. Asolo is a city, small city in the province of Treviso, and Prosecco is in the province of Trieste. So it's to name place names. We are called the Prosecco because we are a spin-off of the Prosecco world from 2009, but we want to be seen as the expression of Asolo Prosecco, and we want to reinforce the identity of Asolo that comes from Colli Asolani and the Montello, because we have these identities and we want to reinforce them. We want to grow, don't want to grow too much with volumes. We don't want that any bunch of our grapes ends up in other wines. We want to manage our grapes ourselves, and we want to grow with this identity. Of course, wine that is well made in any denomination, any designation. And also, when we say superiore, superiore refers only to spumante wines. And there is a small production of Asolo Prosecco, which is still, and also of sparkling Asolo Prosecco. So the Asolo Prosecco fermo, still, and frizzante fizzy, like for Corneliano Valdobbiadene, fermo and frizzante, cannot write superiore, because superiore means spumante for Prosecco. For the two DOCGs of Prosecco, superiore means spumante, and it's not compulsory to write it, so it's optional. Wineries can write it, can write superiore if they make a spumante. They almost all write it, but it's not compulsory. I can write Asolo Prosecco DOCG, full stop. And I can add, if I like, superiore. But superiore doesn't mean with a different level of quality or higher quality. It just means spumante, which is different from the still wine and the sparkling wine in this case. In Italian, when we hear superiore, we mean superior, which is kind of better. But in this case, superiore is the spumante coming from these two areas, Asolo and Corigliano Valdobbiadene. And they're different from DOC, which is not superiore, because the designation is larger and they don't have such small productions decided in 2009 when the spin-off of Asolo Corigliano Valdobbiadene were made. This is also that is not very well known too. From London, they are asking what is the blend for wine number 4. Wine number 4, which is Belle Caselle. Let me tell you, well, all the varieties that we saw earlier on, here they are. So Glera, 85%, and then Verdiso, Bianchetta Trevigiana, Pereira, and Glera Lunga. So all these varieties, so the indigenous varieties admitted by the rule book, then Glera, Verdiso. Unfortunately, Bianchetta and Trevigiana are not different. It's just Bianchetta Trevigiana, one variety, not two. Then Pereira and Glera Lunga. There is a misprint. The Glera Lunga is called Glera Lunga, but it's not that Glera up on top. It's different. Also physically, so visibly, it's different. So these are the varieties. So if we are done, we can all take a shower of fresh Asolo Prosecco because it's very warm here. I don't know about London, whether it's fresher. I hope that your room is fresher than ours. In any case, thank you very much for your attention. And I say this for buyers and journalists. In case you need any information, you can write to the Consorzio di Tutela, and the website is asolomontello.it, or you can write to me. info@angeloperetti.it. And if you need samples or information, don't hesitate to ask. So please contact, and we will be very happy to send you samples of wines to taste, to further become familiar with them. I understand we are not known, we didn't exist until recently at all. So we existed on paper, but we didn't have this wine. So feel free to contact, don't hesitate, and we are at your disposal. And always I am ready to come to London or to the States to see you. Thank you, and thank you to the staff of Milano Wine Week.